Your collection pages are some of the most powerful pages on your Shopify store, both for SEO and for conversions. But most store owners haven't properly optimized their collection pages. Today we'll be breaking down best practices and common mistakes people make that will hurt your conversion rate. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, in this episode, Patrick and I are going to be talking about collection pages on Shopify and how to optimize them. And we're going to be talking about two different aspects of your collection page, both the SEO side, how do we get collection pages to rank higher organically, as well as the CRO or conversion rate optimization side of how do we make them user-friendly and actually help people, once they land on your site, to find what they need quickly and make a purchase decision on your site rather than clicking away and maybe buying somewhere else. So ultimately it comes down to getting more traffic and then also generating more revenue with your traffic. And we have a kind of what I think is a really interesting list of like recommended optimizations to think about. But also there is sometimes a little bit of a tension there between the SEO and the CRO side. And so I'm excited to dig into this with you, Patrick.
Yeah. So this is a great topic. So thanks for bringing it up, Leighton. Collection pages are the unsung hero of SEO for sure. Google ranks these pages more often than any other page for commercial type keywords. And so your collection pages are very important for SEO. But as you mentioned, there's a huge tension oftentimes between SEO teams and CRO teams because the SEO team wants to fill collection pages up with content. CRO team wants to take all of that away. And so there's a great tension there. And it's something that you can balance both to make sure that you're generating as much revenue and as many conversions from those pages as you can, because they're very key for not only SEO, but also just the navigation of a website. So like just a collection page in general, the actual purpose of it is to navigate to the right product. So, that's always number one, and then optimizing from there.
Yeah, and probably the most obvious or clear example of that tension that we were talking about is that for SEO, you really need a lot of quality content on the page that Google and other search engines can crawl and see what the page is about and then decide to rank that page. But if a user lands on your page and they see a bunch of text, a wall of text they have to scroll through before they see any products, then that could hurt your conversion rate, make it harder for them to actually get to buying. So how do we, get the right balance there, doing what's good for SEO, but also not hurting the user experience too much. And just like if we take a step back and think about the purpose of a collection page or like from a philosophical perspective, like where does it fit into the buyer journey? Somebody might know that they need a certain kind of product. Like, well, let's say I have a camping trip planned and I know I need a tent, but I have no clue beyond that, like what kind of tent, what are my options? Like, what are the materials, what are the different features I need to choose from? I might have very little idea. So, I just start Googling and I start, finding different websites. And eventually I might land on a collection or a category page where I see, hundreds of different tents. And so from there, our job as the store owner is to help just sort of gradually, but in a very frictionless way, like help them narrow in on exactly the right tent that's best for their needs and for their use case and their budget. And so like, how do we design the collection page in a way that, helps them get there quickly?
Yeah, bringing it to that perspective is extremely important because that also helps SEO. So these pages are typically having a lot of people come in from Google or other search engines where, like you mentioned, they know they need a tent, but they don't know what type. They may not even know much about the different types of tents. And so from Google, but also from a user perspective, these pages should be somewhat hybrid. Now, I'm a big fan of separating CRO and SEO as much as possible. So, at the top of the page, you may just have H1 that's very simple, right? So if it's searching tents, it can just be tents. Have, a paragraph or two below that, really a sentence or two below that, maybe one paragraph at most. That's useful for SEO. Having no content there can be negative for SEO. So just giving some basic context and use of the keyword, and then just going straight into the products. And so having a lot of products there for them to explore, a filter menu so that they can cheese things up. And, if applicable for tents, subcategories. So having the different subcategories on maybe, waterproof tents, big tents, whatever it might be. I know that there's a lot of people that really like very lightweight. So they get very into lightweight camping because you have to wear a backpack if you're doing multiple day camps. So it's all of this kind of information that you want to pack into a page make it easy to navigate, easy to shop, but then also for both Google and a little bit of users, adding content below those products that just guides them through. If they're really just searching tints, like they may have questions on like, what is a hyper light tint? What is the different types of tints? Why would weight matter so much? What tint is good for like a week-long backpacking trip? So like these kind of questions, and maybe adding in YouTube videos, things like that like actually help them in terms of their pre-purchase or buying journey kind of stuff. That can be useful for users, but mainly it's very useful for Google because it gets in all those keywords and is very useful there. So I think you're exactly correct to think about what is this page actually being used for.
Yeah, and as you were talking about those kinds of like FAQs and that content, it really made me think about how people are using AI now to help do some of this research. So let's say I'm clueless about tents. I go into ChatGPT or whatever and I start asking questions like, I'm planning this camping trip, like what tent should I buy? And it might start asking me questions like, well, what temperature is it going to be? Like, are you going to be backpacking? Do you need to carry it? And then from there, it's going to start like making recommendations. So I'm curious for your perspective, Patrick, with GEO, like does this content on the collection page have a good chance of getting, picked up and used by these AI tools in the user chats as well?
Yeah. I think a big thing about the collection pages for GEO is going to be those subcategories more than anything. So like if you have, say, it asks you for what temperature will it be, and maybe you're going to like a really hot place or something like this, then maybe you want a subcategory on your tints page that's like high temperature tints or hyper lightweight tints. All those are going to be the subcategories that you can click in. They're distinct pages, and then they have content additionally on what makes a tint good for different temperatures and all this kind of information. A lot of the AI bots are going to be, as they're asking you questions and they figure these things out, they're essentially refining down searches on search engines. So then they're looking at like, best tints for temperatures 90 degrees and above. So if you have a page on your website that's like high temperature tints, and then you mention in the content of like different temperature ranges and what matters in those, that's going to be much more likely to be sourced by AI. And that's where you get a lot of AI makes the long tail. So like these very specific pages and questions and content be very important. So I find the most important thing there is, if they are just asking, like what's the best tint, then having the content on the collection page is going to be helpful for that query. But when they get very specific, which people are now, those subcategories are becoming more and more important.
Right. So that actually leads into the first tip that I had put in my notes that I wanted to talk about as we go through our list here for how to optimize a collection page. And that is that a collection page should demonstrate the breadth of the category. And by that, I mean, if it's a very broad category with a lot of sort of subtypes of products within it, we need to demonstrate that very quickly at the top of the page. So in this example, let's say we're on a tents category page. If the first few rows of products, if the customer only sees one kind of tent and it's not the kind they're looking for, then they feel like they've gotten themselves into a corner. We're narrowing in too quickly for the user experience. They're still in the very broad shopping mode. So we need to quickly show them like this is a broad category and then help them within that to narrow in on what you have available. And one of the best ways to do that is with a list of subcategories across the top of the collection. And I'm actually going to share an example here. All right, so in this example from REI, we're on a tents category page. And you can see across the top here, we have a nice list of subcategories. So some of the ones we were just talking about. Backpacking tents, which are going to be like the ultra light ones. Camping tents, shelters, rooftop tents, hammock tents, shower tents. And then as I scroll down the page, I can quickly see kind of a wide variety of different product types near the top of the page. So the user doesn't feel too backed into a corner yet. They can easily kind of gradually work their way into something that's what they're looking for. And then the second recommendation within this is that the images that you see at the top here, if a user clicks on one of these categories, we need to make sure that whatever product is shown as the representation of that subcategory is actually easy to find when they click through to it. So as an example, if let's say the user clicks on backpacking tents and just notice what this orange tent looks like, and then they land on the subcategory page for backpacking tents, that product is right there. It's easy to find within the first couple rows of products. So what we don't want to do is frustrate the user by making it so that if they click on this sub-navigation thinking, oh, I like the look of that 10, I want that specific one, and then they get to the subcategory page and they can't find it. Like that's going to, they feel like they reach a dead end, and that's not a good user experience. That's just like one little example of how we want to like show the user what's available and then make it easy to find as they get narrower in there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because those details really matter. And all user engagement signals, Google does collect them. So oftentimes, yeah, if you have a lot of bounce backs, so someone lands on the page and you only have, super small tents and they're looking for, a tent for 5 people, they're going to bounce. And an easy way to fix that is have one of those subcategories as like tents for, 5 people or whatever it is. And you can also use filter menus for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing about subcategories from an SEO perspective is that they filter menus are usually not indexable for Google. So if you do want to increase the visibility on all AI bots, search bots, and everything like that, having a distinct page that's indexable for them that has unique content is critical. So a lot of people do filter menus, but then that has, you might filter down to 5-person tent, but it still says tents as its main H1, has no unique content. The page just changes the products. Can be a good user experience, but that's where UX and SEO don't always converge. There's some distinction there. But yeah, I think that's a great point. Of those subcategories are hugely important. And if you do just have a website with one page that's just tents and you have no other pages, it's going to be very hard to rank on Google.
Yeah. And just to back up to what you were saying about filters. So we're talking about filters in a sidebar like this, where the user can, here they can filter by sleeping capacity, a 2-person, 3-person, 4-person tent, by brand, season, weight. And that's another area where I think people might not be sure exactly what to do. Do I just, use a bunch of filters with one big tents collection? Or do we need links out to these like separate collections for each subcategory? And like you were saying, I think it's a big SEO consideration. So I'm curious if you agree with this, Patrick, but if you have categories with keywords you're trying to rank for, but they might also be important filters, would you go ahead and set them up as separate collections, but then also on the big broad collection, show them as filters as well, and kind of let the user get to it in either way?
Yeah, we'd usually allow the user to get to it either way. And you can nest these things further, right? So you could have, typically on any large e-com site, you're going to have those subcategories that are big search queries, like you saw there, backpacking tents and stuff like that, because they want that traffic and that visibility. But you can also, when they click into backpacking tents, you could then have a whole new set of subcategories that are distinct pages that are for different sub attributes of a backpacking tent. And so that can be a powerful way if you don't want to just have a ton of subcategories. You can subdivide it more. But yeah, I think it's important to have those subcategories in there. And then you can replicate it on the filter. I think at that point, it's mostly just about seeing, what's best for the user and trying to deduce that. But I love that screenshot you shared, and that was on REI. If anyone's just listening, REI does a good job of having both the subcategories as well as the filter menu there.
All right, let's move on to the next tip here, and that is to break up long product titles into shorter, visually distinct chunks. And there is a bit of a technical side to this as in terms of how your theme does it, because what we don't want to do is actually truncate the product title or the H1 tag on the product page to be short and not have all the relevant SEO information and all that. So let me show you an example of what I'm talking about, and this will make a little bit more sense. All right, so this website is called Crutchfield. They sell a lot of audio equipment. And here on their collection page, which is actually a bit different in layout, it's more of a vertical. It's more of a vertical list view rather than a grid view. So this right here is a single product tile on a collection page.
Yeah.
But what you'll see is that this right here, both the top large bold text and the smaller text underneath, that's all part of the product title.
Yep.
So if you actually click through and look at the product page, this entire block here is the H1. So it's the brand, the product model, and then some descriptive text about what it is. So it's Sennheiser Momentum 4 wireless, over-ear noise canceling Bluetooth headphones. So this kind of gets back to that tension between the SEO and the CRO, because we do want to have all of this really important information, both the brand, the product name, and then these highly important SEO keywords in the product title. But if we had this part as this big bold text, this product title would probably be at least 3 or 4 lines long. It would be a lot of bold text, and it could be visually overwhelming to the user. So how do we present it in a way that is visually digestible? And the way that they do it is they break it up into two separate text blocks. The first one is big and bold. The second one is smaller and light. And this is a bit tricky to do if you're not a developer, but it is fairly simple to do in the theme code. You can go in, you can add like a separator in your product titles and say everything before this, show big, bold, everything after it, show the small, light version. So this is something I like to try to do if we do need these long, kind of wordy titles, just to keep the SEO benefit, but not hurt the user experience too much.
Yeah, that's really great. I haven't actually thought about that in detail, but I'm looking at the REI one as well. And that does a kind of similar thing where it actually has the brand as bolded, and then so like the North Face or something like that. And then the full title, which would be like half dome 210 with footprint. And so, yeah, I think it is important. Like a lot of titles are very long. And so being able to not overwhelm the user when they're looking through multiple products. Yeah, I love that implementation. And then just like making sure that you're not just removing that title information, because it does all play a part in the SEO. Like I've had a collection page where we actually just updated the product names of all the products within there and added more keywords, entities, relevant text onto the title. And that increased ranking of the collection page. So like if you just blatant remove or truncate all titles, you could have a negative SEO impact. So like it is important to kind of consider that. So this is a really nice interplay where you can have the bolded text as the primary title and then kind of like a little subtext there that gives the rest of the title.
Yep. And this is the kind of thing that a developer can pretty easily set up for you, or you might even be able to do it on your own with, ChatGPT or Claude these days.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, those titles are super important. And something else that I love about that example you showed. So he mentioned it's not a grid result, but it's actually like a 1-by-1 result. I don't know how, a list view almost.
List view.
And it also shows attributes of the products. This is one of the best things you can do for SEO is if you can show content within the product card. So if you ever go to like Best Buy or something like that, you'll oftentimes see attributes where it's like, the computer has like a, SDD card, or it has this, that, and the other thing, 1 terabyte of RAM or 1 terabyte of hard drive. And so these kind of attributes within the product card will just expand the amount of content, keywords, and relevant text on the page that Google can crawl just by a ton. And so you can get really great SEO benefit from that, as well as CRO benefit from adding those additional attributes.
For sure. And then going back to the tense example in REI, this is one I had noted before, where each product card has this little list of, product features, specs. So sleeping capacity, trail weight, seasons, features. And so this can help the user if they're scrolling down a big list of products before they have to commit by clicking into a product page and waiting for a new page load and all that. They can kind of quickly scan and see, at a glance, like which of these products looks like it might be promising before, and then click into the one that's more likely. And that can reduce clicking back and forth and, just anything we can do to reduce friction in that user experience as they browse to what they're looking for is a good idea.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, you see it all over the place because it's very good for both SEO and CRO. So I do really love that. Another thing that you mentioned just in our notes for this call was turning off the quick view as well as changing the pagination. So I'm curious on the quick view. Have you seen that just not really work and kind of slow things down? I know a lot of Shopify. I think a lot of Shopify themes do that on default. So oftentimes I see clients having that, and so I like that you're recommending to not do that.
Yeah, so quick view or quick shop is an extremely common feature. You've probably seen it in a bunch of places. And like you said, in most Shopify themes, it's included, and often it's turned on by default when you install the theme. And so what this does is when you're on the collection page, you might see a little quick view button or a magnifying glass. And when you click on it, it opens a truncated version of the product in a pop-up window rather than taking you to the product detail page. And The problem with this, so I'm basing this recommendation on studies that have been done by Baymard, which they do a ton of user experience research. I love their articles and studies they put out. And what in their testing, they found that when a quick view feature is there, a lot of times the user will open it by accident and not realize that they're not on the full product page. And so then they're seeing a shortened version of the product description. If it's a spec-driven or technical product, that's going to have a lot of maybe a table of technical specifications of voltage, amps, whatever, depending on your product, or maybe a lot of documents, manuals, PDFs that you're trying to show, or videos. You're never going to be able to really show all that in a little quick view pop-up in a way that is user friendly. And so a lot of users are going to see the quick view pop-up, but they're never actually going to make it to the product page. And so they don't have enough information to decide to add to cart and buy that product. So for more technical products, we just want to take the user directly to the product page when they click anywhere on that product grid item and on a collection. So they have full access to all that information and can actually make an informed decision. On the other hand, if your product is very visually driven, if it's maybe clothing, if it's art, maybe rugs, or anything where the technical details aren't as important, or where you don't have to have this really long description, then it's more okay to use the quick view. But you do want to make sure that it's not confusing, that that it would be difficult for the user to accidentally click on it and open it by accident when they meant to go to the full product page. Or if they are looking at the quick view, to have a really obvious link to view full product description where they can go to the full product page and they're not left confused as to where they are in the hierarchy of your site.
Yeah, I tend to not love them. It's strange that it's included in a lot of Shopify themes as the default. But when you actually go to most, enterprise e-com sites, I don't really see them using it very often. Like you mentioned, it may work for certain niches in clothing. And so I haven't really checked out a ton of those examples. But in general, I find that, they're not super useful. As long as the site is pretty fast, if they're clicking on a product, they should probably just go to the main product page. So I think that it's a little bit just typically not super useful. I've also seen it slow down sites too, because occasionally they'll be implemented where it's loading both images, the quick view image as well as the normal thumbnail image. So I find that it's probably something typically that should be turned off, but it could be useful in certain industries for sure.
Yep. And then the other one you mentioned, the pagination setting. So this is referring to, on your collection pages at the bottom, you'll often see these numbers 1, 2, 3, next, first, last, things like that. If you have a lot of pages of products, then you might have 15, 30, 50 pages, tons of pages. And this is problematic in my opinion, because the user doesn't really have any reason to click on 2 rather than 3 or 3 rather than 15. It's kind of like a random choice of which one am I going to pick on? And so you're almost giving the user too many choices here. Another one that's pretty popular is an infinite scroll, where as you start scrolling down the collection, the next page of 20, 30, 50 products just automatically appears as you scroll. And the problem with infinite scroll is that it makes it almost impossible for the user to ever get to the footer of your site. And the footer often has a lot of really important customer service information. You might have links there to your shipping and returns page, your FAQs, your contact information. And so you're making it very difficult for someone to find that info in your footer if you have a long collection that is infinitely almost loading more and more products, and that can be frustrating. So what I found to be kind of the preferred middle ground there is what I call a click to load more approach, and that looks more like this. So you have your page of products, and then you just have a simple button to load more products, and if the user clicks that, it loads the next pages worth of products. So we're not giving them too many choices with the 2, 3, 15, next, last, whatever. We're just saying, do you want to see more products? Yes or no. It's a very simple choice. They click that and then they can see more.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good way to do it. I think the most standard for SEO is to do the kind of traditional pagination with the numbers and everything, because it's so OG and kind of the traditional thing. I think that it's possible to do it wrong. So it's important to ensure it's accessible to bots. So what we'll sometimes see is that people will use pure JavaScript to run the load more, and it may be that a lot of products are just not able to be really easily rendered by bots. So I think that's something to definitely be careful with. But in general, if it's implemented well, it can be great for SEO. And But yeah, I typically like it if it's possible to have real crawlable URLs where it's like when you're clicking that button, it still changes the like question mark page equals 2,
Yeah.
3,
Yeah.
4. And just every time you click that button, it creates like it's that new URL that's crawlable for Google.
Yeah. I'm curious for your input on that actually, and this might be getting off on a tangent, but so one thing that we've done in the past based on recommendations from other SEO consultants or agencies we've worked with for our clients, and I'm curious if you agree, is when you click to page 2 or 3 or whatever, and you have that question mark page equals 2 in the URL, what we've done in the past is we've changed those secondary pages after the first page to be non-canonical, or they'll have a canonical tag that points back to the primary collection page without that pagination in the URL. Because what we want to avoid, in my understanding, is we don't want to have those other pages from the same collection competing with the main collection URL for the same keywords. So the canonical tag is a way to tell Google, like, no, the first page is the one we want you to rank. The second ones are part of the same page, essentially. And I'm curious for your thoughts on how to handle that.
Yeah, no, this is a really common question in SEO that I've personally gone back and forth with. The competing thoughts are either self-canonicalized pagination. So like page 2 is canonicalized to page 2. So they're just the same canonical versus canonicalizing to the top, like the category first page, the main page of it. So in my experience, actually self-canonical is better. They both can work. There's the competing theories is that you can either have cannibalization between the paginated pages, which I have seen before, but Google recommends in their documentation now, and they kind of been a little bit sketchy on this, but now they recommend to do self-canonicalization. The main reason is that they're not duplicates because they contain different product sets. So because the products are completely different, they aren't the same page. I do think you can kind of do either way, but what we prefer now is self-canonical. I've seen it work both ways on large sites, but self-canonical is the way we like to go.
So just for my edification, if I have all that content we were talking about with the collection description, the FAQs and all that, in an ideal world, should we actually hide that content on the second and third and fourth pages? Or is it okay to have that be essentially duplicate content on those other pages?
Yeah, so it's okay to have that on the other pages, but yeah, in an ideal world, it's best to actually hide that content when you're on page 2, 3, 4. But Google isn't actually as harsh on duplicate content as people have believed in the past. As long as the page is not fully duplicate, then they're usually pretty understandable. So all the products will be different. So even if you have some content at the bottom that's the same, you're unlikely to get, too much of a ding there. But it is best. I mean, if you can hide the content, we've done that many times. It is better if you hide it on page 2 and 3, just so that they're more clearly separate.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and we can get really nerdy into technical SEO with collection pages because there's a lot of things that people do on this, and so I'll spare the audience. But yeah, I mean, in terms of filters, right, you need to make sure that those aren't indexable because that can create a million URLs. So and then some people get crazy and they have some of them as indexable and some of them not. So you'll see that on large sites. And so there's all kinds of stuff that can be done. But yeah, those are some of the key things there. I like the click to load. The main thing there is to try to make that an A tag rather than a button. The JavaScript button is harder for Google to crawl. While an A tag, if it's just stylized like a button, they'll click on it every time.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. We went through a lot here that I think is really beneficial. So showing a collection page, and thank you for sharing the screenshots too about how they should look, the subcategories, which are huge, filter menu, if possible, if you have a developer like you, to add in those attributes and some of the fancy things you can do on the product cards, and then have the content below the fold for some of the SEO stuff. So just having some content there that can give context. If you're getting into GEO and AI visibility, having those different questions and contextual things of, if you're this, if you're that, all very helpful.
Yeah. Any other tips on the SEO side that you want to share today?
Yeah. So I would really say just the basics are really important. So, looking at making sure that your SEO title tag is the exact target keyword, and then your H1 tag is the exact target keyword. Having a little bit of content below the H1 And then you really don't need a ton of content, but usually like 600 to 800 words below the products. I mean, sometimes 400 words is fine. I don't think Google cares a ton about the word count. It's mostly just having the right keywords in there as well as entities. But really just write to your customers and you'll get, half of that there if you're doing it solo.
Can you quickly go over, for people who don't know, what entities are?
Yeah. So essentially they're just nouns. So they're nouns that are relevant to the primary keyword. So if you have tents, like backpacking would be one of them. So it's like an idea that is very related to the primary keyword. There's a lot of tools that will try to extract these from. So they'll take the top 10 results of Google, they'll run it through natural language processing and try to extract the main ideas that Google associates with the main keyword. So we know that Google has a knowledge base of these entities, person, places, things, and all of this that connects to the main keyword. We don't have access to their database of that, but there are a lot of tools that you can use to kind of get some of those. But in general, like you can also just use basic knowledge, right? So you can kind of figure out what those things are just by, thinking about the attributes of something. So like with a tent, you can think about all the attributes of a tent, people capacity would be an entity, things like that. Size would be. So making sure that you're answering all the pre-purchase questions is going to be the easiest way to get a lot of that in there.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah. So that's like a huge thing. And then if you are working with a large site, a guy named Nick that's in one of the Slack groups I'm in just released a Shopify app called Link Stacks. So I'm giving him a shout out. It currently has one review, so if you use it, it's going to be a little bit of a beta because he just released it. But it's super useful. So what it does is that I think he worked at Adidas previously as an SEO. And if you go to, and I might be wrong on that, but one of these large sites, if you go to any of these large e-com sites on their categories, typically they'll have a related collections page. So you'll usually see it on sites where you go down to the bottom and it says, it just has a bunch of links to different collection pages or category pages. And so this tool here on Shopify does that same thing and can be very useful. So if you have a large site, just adding essentially like subcategory links to the bottom of the page as well and adding more of them so that you can, so this tool will like randomize, like kind of like get a different set of them and then have the anchor text of the link change up as well. So lots of cool stuff you can just do with internal linking around collection pages.
Nice. Well, I feel like we've just barely touched the surface of everything you could improve and work on with collection pages, especially when you get into the technical SEO stuff. Like there's so much more there we could get into. So hopefully we can dig into some of that more in future episodes. But I think this has been a good conversation and some really interesting points here that hopefully people may not have thought of for their own stores and that they can implement fairly easily. And if you have any questions, want to chat about any of this, feel free to leave a comment or shoot us an email and we'll include our contact info in the show notes.
Yeah. And if anybody has specific questions around their pages and stuff, we can have you on the podcast and we can talk through your site or what you're doing. So always curious about that. Yeah. Today, just to give a recap, because I think it's important to not look too much in the nitty gritty and just kind of get the 80-20. Like a collection page needs to assist the user in navigating to the right product. So that's the first concern. Once you have that down, that kind of elucidates a lot of what we've been talking about, which is they're on a general category page on tents. They're going to need a good filter menu so they can filter through all your products. And they're going to need some subcategories that are just very popular, essentially filters, but they're going to be distinct pages because that's important for SEO. They're going to need good product cards where you can see the products well, so that you can navigate and find your right product. Ideally, if they can include, some visual assistance, like what Leighton is saying with maybe attributes or shortening the titles of the products, that's going to be beneficial. And then for SEO, just having the title tag with the keyword, H1 with the keyword, and then having FAQs and some content below the products, it's going to be huge. And then if you can add in a click to load button, anything like that, it's going to make it easier to navigate across all products. And then you have a pretty good looking collection page and you can start to compete on SEO and lead customers to the right products.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks for the recap.
You're welcome. And thank you for bringing the great topic. I love these collection pages. They account for a lot of traffic in SEO. So definitely some good work to be done across your collection pages. A lot of times for us, a big portion of it is creating the subcategories. because I find a lot of times people will, it's almost the easiest win, because if you have a collection page that's like tense and you have no category pages underneath that, like all you really have to do, especially if tagging is in place, is like just create 10 different new collection pages that have the filter set to whatever the filter is. Now they're distinct pages that Google can crawl and index. And you just have to write a little bit of content, optimize the page, do your thing, and then you can get additional traffic. So on the SEO side of things, honestly, the subcategories can be the quickest win.
Nice. Yeah, it's good to have like quick wins you can implement easily without a ton of development or needing to write tons of content or whatever. So yeah, getting a few things knocked out quickly and then focusing on maybe the longer tail stuff can be a good way to start. And if anybody has ideas for topics that you'd like us to cover, feel free to let us know. I think we're probably in coming weeks going to have a similar deep dive into how to optimize product pages. We might talk about the cart and checkout and some things that can and should be done there. But yeah, feel free to let us know if you have questions or anything you'd like to hear us talk about.
Yeah, very exciting. Well, thank you so much, Leighton, for your time. Looking forward to next week.
All right. Thanks, Patrick. Me too. I'll see you next time.
Talk soon. Bye.